It was 4:27 a.m. when I made the hardest decision of my life. Not for me. For my son. The flashing lights from the ice vans lit up our small living room. Footsteps approached the door. And in that moment, I realized this might be the last time I ever kiss him goodbye, that we thought we were safe. We paid our taxes. We stayed out of trouble. We believed that if we worked hard, stayed quiet, and followed the rules, maybe, just maybe, they would leave us alone. But fear doesn't knock. It kicks the door in. And that morning, when I stepped forward and raised my hands, I thought the pain of leaving my family would be the end of me. Until my son, just 8 years old, said something that made even the ICE agents stop in their tracks. That's when I knew this story wasn't about borders or documents. It was about love, and what a father is willing to give when there's nothing left to offer but himself. They met cleaning tables at a taco joint just outside of Phoenix. Carlos was 27. Elena was 24. Both undocumented. Both chasing something bigger than survival. Carlos had crossed the border when he was just 19. Alone, hungry, terrified, but stubborn enough to believe that he could build something out of nothing. For years, he scraped by. He lived in a garage, worked 3 jobs, sent money to his mother back in Guerrero. He had no papers, no rights, but he had grit. And when he met Elena, he also found love. They married quietly in a church basement. No guests. No cake. Just a whispered prayer and a promise. Then Liam was born. From the moment Carlos held that baby boy in his arms, something inside him shifted. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He wanted to protect, provide, build something that would last longer than fear. They did everything right as they could. Got Liam into school, volunteered at the church, filed taxes every year using an ITIN. They even saved up enough to rent a tiny 2-bedroom house with a cracked driveway and a lemon tree in the backyard. For a while, they thought they were safe. Safety, for people like Carlos, is a mirage. It started with a knock on the neighbor's door. Then an unmarked car parked across the street. Then a strange man asking questions about suspicious activity. Carlos felt it in his chest, that old pressure he thought he'd buried. He began checking the windows more, telling Liam to keep the door locked, even when playing outside. Then came the call. ICE had received an anonymous tip. Undocumented family, probably using fake social security numbers. Look into the blue house on Maple Street. That was it. Years of building, erased with one accusation. No trial. No chance. To explain. Carlos knew the clock was ticking. He considered fleeing, packing a bag, grabbing Elena and Liam, and heading to another state. But Liam had just started 2nd grade. He had friends. A routine. A life. Carlos couldn't rip that away. Instead, they stayed, prayed, hoped that maybe, just maybe, they'd be forgotten. They weren't. On a cold Wednesday morning in January, the knock came. It wasn't just a knock. It was a pounding, urgent, and aggressive. Carlos was already awake. He had sensed it. There's something about fear. It becomes instinct. He opened the door before they could break it down. 3 agents, uniforms, guns, clipboards. One read his name aloud. He didn't flinch. Behind him, Elena stood frozen, holding Liam close. An agent glanced past Carlos and pointed toward Elena. Carlos stepped forward, arms out. "It's just me," he said. "She's not on your list. Let them stay." They... Lead agent hesitated, checked his tablet. Only Carlos's name was there. He nodded. Elena cried silently. Carlos turned to his son. Liam's eyes were wide, confused. "Dad, where are you going?" Carlos forced a smile. "Just need to fix something." I'll be back before dinner. He kissed his wife's forehead. Kneeling to Liam's height, he whispered, "Be strong. You're the man of the house now." Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned back to the agents and extended his hands. They cuffed him, and in that single moment, everything he had tried to protect began to crack. But the real breaking point was still to come. As the agents began escorting Carlos to the van, Liam suddenly bolted forward. He slipped past his mother and ran, barefoot, tears streaming. 2 agents reached out to stop him, but the lead agent signaled them to hold off. Liam stood in front of the van, his small chest heaving. He looked up at the men, defiant and broken all at once. Then he spoke, his voice trembling, but loud enough to echo. "If you take my dad, will one of you be my dad now? Because no one else will love me like he does." Silence, not just from the agents, but from the entire block. Even the wind seemed to stop. The youngest agent looked away. The one holding Carlos shifted uncomfortably. The lead agent knelt down in front of Liam and said nothing for a long time. Just looked into his eyes. Elena finally reached them and pulled Liam close. He buried his face into her chest, sobbing. Carlos didn't say a word. He couldn't. His throat had closed with emotion. As the van pulled away, he stared through the mesh at his family, growing smaller and smaller in the distance. His last image of home wasn't the lemon tree, wasn't the house. It was Liam, standing in the eye. Street, arms around his mother, holding a crumpled drawing in one hand, a stick-figure family under a big yellow sun. The words in crooked letters, "My hero, my dad." That day, Carlos lost everything he had built, but the words of an 8-year-old boy were still echoing in the minds of the agents who had taken him. And in one of them, something had shifted. The detention center was cold, not just in temperature, but in spirit. Carlos had imagined what it would be like. Fluorescent lights, cement walls, thin mattresses. But nothing could prepare him for the hollowness of being just a number again. He wasn't Carlos here. He was C4971, one of dozens crammed into a holding area, all waiting to be processed, questioned, and most likely deported. They took his shoelaces, his belt, his phone. But what hurt most was that they took his voice. He had no lawyer, no hearing, no chance to explain what kind of father he was, what kind of life he had built. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Liam, barefoot, crying, asking if someone else would love him now. That moment replayed like a loop in his mind. And each time, it tore him open a little more. He hadn't cried. Not during the arrest. Not when he was chained to the van seat. Not when they fingerprinted him. But that night, in a steel bunk, surrounded by strangers, beneath a flickering ceiling light, he cried silently into a government-issued pillow. For Liam. For Elena. For the years he'd spent building something that could be erased in seconds. And he wasn't the only one breaking. Across the city, Agent Mason, the ICE officer who had read Carlos's name at the door, couldn't sleep. In his 10 years on the job, he had executed over 200 raids. He'd seen resistance. He'd seen tears. He'd seen people run. But never had he heard something like what that little boy said. "If you take my dad, will one of you be my dad now?" It haunted him. Agent Mason had a son too. Same age, same messy handwriting, same habit of sleeping with a stuffed dinosaur tucked under his chin. But Mason got to go home every night, got to kiss his son's forehead, got to sit through bedtime stories, even when he was too tired to keep his eyes open. Carlos wouldn't get that anymore. Not after what Mason had done. He tried to shake it, told himself he was just following orders. That Carlos had broken the law, that the system was bigger than feelings. But the next morning, he found himself opening the file again. Carlos had a spotless record. No arrests, no traffic violations. Filed taxes for 8 consecutive years. Owned a registered business as a handyman. Letters of community support from his church and clients, including U.S. citizens. Mason paused. One letter stood out, written by a woman named Grace Ramirez. It read, "Carlos has fixed everything in my house over the last 5 years. But more than that, he has become family. My husband passed away in 2018, and Carlos came by every week just to check in. He brings his son sometimes. Liam helps me. Feed my dogs. This man is no criminal. He's the kind of neighbor every American should pray for." Mason sat there for a long time. He picked up the drawing Liam had handed him. Yes, he had kept it. Crayon lines. A child's son. 3 stick figures. One word beneath them all. Home. Mason knew he couldn't change the law. But maybe he could do something. He called his supervisor, then a local immigration attorney, then a contact at a nonprofit that helped mixed-status families. It was against protocol, maybe even a risk to his career. But he didn't care. Back at the detention center, Carlos had been moved to a smaller cell. He was being prepped for transfer to Tijuana the next morning. No time left. No one to fight for him until a guard called his name. Not C4971. Carlos. Alvarez. "Someone's here to see you," the guard said. Carlos was confused. Visits weren't allowed without pre-clearance, but when he walked into the visitation room, he froze. Behind the glass, sitting in uniform, was Agent Mason. Carlos instinctively stood straighter, bracing himself, but Mason wasn't there to intimidate him. He looked different. Human. He picked up the phone and said quietly, "Your son reminded me what it means to be a father. I can't undo what's happened, but maybe I can help fix it." Carlos didn't speak. He just stared. Mason slid a folder across the glass divider. Inside were documents. An emergency petition, a temporary stay of removal, and the contact information of an immigration lawyer willing to take Carlos's case pro bono. Carlos's hands trembled. His voice cracked. "Why are you doing this?" Mason paused. "Because you didn't just protect your son. You showed mine what courage looks like." That night, for the first time in days, Carlos slept. Not because things were fixed, but because hope had returned. Carlos wasn't released that day, but within 72 hours, the stay was approved. He was moved to a less restrictive facility. The case began to gather attention. Local reporters, community leaders, church members all rallied around him. And through it all, Liam kept drawing pictures of his dad fixing sinks, carrying him on his shoulders, laughing, living. Each one was sent to Mason. Each one deepened his resolve, because sometimes change doesn't start in court. It starts with a child asking a question no adult wants to answer. 3 months later, Carlos stepped off a plane at Denver International Airport. He wasn't free, not fully. He still faced hearings, paperwork, and uncertainty. But he had something even more powerful than legal status. A chance. Waiting at the arrival's gate, holding a sign that read, "Dad equals my hero," was Liam. When Carlos saw him, he dropped his bag and ran. Liam threw himself into his father's arms, laughing and crying at the same time. Elena stood nearby, covering her mouth, eyes full of disbelief and gratitude. They were together. Not safe, but whole. For the first few weeks, Carlos couldn't sleep in a bed without waking in panic. He'd jolt upright, heart racing, convinced he was still locked in a cell. But every time, he'd feel Liam's small hand on his shoulder. "You're home, Dad," the boy would whisper. He was. Carlos got back to work. Clients welcomed him with open arms. One even helped him set up a legitimate LLC so he could operate his handyman services legally under the temporary status. But something else was happening too. Liam's story, the words he had said that day in front of the van, had gone viral. Neighbor had recorded it on their doorbell camera. The video had been shared over 1 million times. If you take my dad, will one of you be my dad now? That question became a headline, a movement, even a campaign slogan for immigrant rights. Groups, letters poured in, some from immigrants, others from ICE agents who had left the agency, broken by guilt. And in the center of it all was an 8-year-old boy who just wanted his family back. Agent Mason was reassigned, not demoted, but transferred to work in a division that focused on humanitarian cases. He no longer kicked down doors. He now advocated for programs that prioritized keeping families together. He kept Liam's drawing framed on his desk. Reminder of the day a child reminded him what justice could look like. Carlos eventually got a work permit. Then, through the help of community organizations and new legislation that benefited mixed-status families, he applied for permanent residency. The process was long. It took years, but every birthday, every school play, every morning coffee shared with Liam was a miracle he never stopped thanking the universe for. One night, after helping Liam with homework, Carlos found another crayon drawing on the fridge. This one showed a house, a son, 2 people, one tall, one small, holding hands, above them written in block letters. We fought. We stayed. We are home. Carlos smiled, because this story didn't end with a van, or a cell, or a courtroom. It ended, and began again, with love. And sometimes love doesn't speak in big speeches. Sometimes it just says, "You're home, Dad."